are you and why do we care?
Yeah, thanks, Shaun. Thanks for having me on your show. Real pleasure to be here. My name's Todd Larkham. I'm a tennis coach in Canberra, Australia. So capital of Australia, small city though. But I worked for Tennis Australia as an elite junior development coach for 15 years. Coached a whole bunch of players during that period. Probably the most famous is Nick Kyrgios. So I coached him from age 10 to 17. So I spent solid 7 years with him. And yeah, that's what I do. I played on tour for 10 years from age 20 to 30. Before that, played in all the majors, but mainly on the challenger level, was ranked between 130 and 200 most of my career. But yeah, the last 20 years, still coaching elite junior players, and really probably specialized in that area. So my parents were both tennis coaches. So, spent my whole life.
Cheating. That's just not fair.
That's right. Spent my whole life in tennis, really. So yeah, it's been my life. I love the sport, and it's great to talk tennis. Love talking tennis with like-minded people, and just great to be here on your show talking tennis.
Yeah, we appreciate the time. And before we dive into talking about Nick and all that, I'm curious. I don't know that I've had a conversation with anybody who has been in that 100 to 200 range for that amount of time. What is that even like? I mean, it's hard to pay your bills when you're 160 in the world. What does that look like for you? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, it really is tough. I mean, it was a great life. I mean, I absolutely love playing tennis and competing and being a professional tennis player, but it is tough. I mean, the income you're earning is you're really just breaking even most years. So you're trying to get creative, find ways to make money. I mean, I played German team tennis every year. You might pick up $20,000-$30,000 for 6 weeks work there. That helps to keep you going. But really, you're living your life on the Challenger Tour, which is a secondary tour, as we know in professional tennis. You're playing in the Grand Slam qualifying events. They're always really key for those kind of players, because if you can get through, maybe get to the first round of a Grand Slam or the second round, you might pick up a decent paycheck, and that can keep you going for the year. But I suppose you're following your dream, and that dream is to be a top 100 player. And that's what we're all striving for. That's where the big bucks are. Play on the main tour week in, week out. So I wasn't able to achieve that, but I was no regrets. So happy that I was able to go out there and play on professional tennis, which was always my dream growing up. And so appreciative and lucky to play in the majors against some great players. So it was an incredible part of my life.
Yeah, I was looking at the schedule with playing against Hewitt and Sampras and Agassi, and I mean, it's got to be such a cool experience. Bobby talks; he's told a story or two of somebody else telling the story of seeing the ball coming from someone like that. It isn't just me and Bobby we're good players, but as coaches hitting the ball, that's just different from a ball trying to return Pete's serve. I mean, it's got to be a different world.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. When I played Sampras, I played him on center court at the US Open. It was the first ever night match to play in 1997. It was the first ever night match on that court, the opening of Arthur Ashe Stadium that year. So Whitney Houston actually sung a song before we walked out. She was there on site. She sang One Moment in Time before we walked out on court. So just an incredible experience. But Pete was always one of my idols. He'd won, played all through my year, won like 7 Wimbledons. I watched him so much, but yeah, I was worried about his serve. And, the first point, he served 130 miles an hour, ace down the tee. And I was like, wow, here's the reality of what this match is going to be like. I managed to get about 7 or 8 games, but I didn't break him. And that was serve was something I'd never faced and never experienced. It was so hard to get in the rallies against him, keep it on a neutral setting. His second serve was so good as well. His second serve was one of the best ever. So hard, flat, powerful. It was like facing a first serve for me. 2 first serves every point. So yeah, one of the greatest serves of all time. And as a coach, I've really tried to use his serve as a real model. His technique, such a perfect technique. So that's how I teach my players. Kyrgios is similar. Serena Williams, Ash Barty serve similar technical aspects to his serve, but he was a real model early 2000s, 90s, the greatest server of all time, I think.
I couldn't agree more. And I would see that serve myself. I'd be like, all right, thanks. I'm out of here. I'm going to go be a coach because it's just not
Yeah.
something I'm going to be able to handle. So what takes you from the tour to coaching? Because I assume during that time, it's just a matter of, all right, then you decide, what do I do next, right? Then you jump into, did you go straight into coaching?
Yeah, I went straight from the tour to coaching. Literally, my parents were still running a tennis facility, so it was an easy transition for me,
Family
coming
business.
straight off tour and back into their facility. Spent a couple of years, and then a job came up with Tennis Australia in my town in Canberra, and yeah, it was a great opportunity to work for the federation, and they provided us such a great environment here in Canberra, an opportunity just to work with 4 or 5 young players, the best players we had in this city, and just to have the time that you need in the week to really spend it just with those players, travel everywhere. Um, Craig Tiley, who's the Australian Open tournament director, started these academies back in 2006 in Australia. Really transformed player development in Australia, and we became really successful from that period on. We'd gone through a really poor period of developing players, but when we started these academies, it took a few years, but we really started to see some success. And players like Ash Barty, Nick Kyrgios, Alex de Minaur, all the players we have in the top 100 now all came through these national academies in Australia. So it's just great to be part of that. And yeah, it was a great kind of school and education for me as well to become an elite coach, a high performance coach.
Yeah, it's got to be, I wouldn't say just as rewarding, but similarly rewarding to see someone that you can mentor and send them on to do tour level things. I mean, that's just, most coaches don't get to do that. Most coaches, I work solely with beginners and mostly 8-year-olds. So if they end up on tour, it's my fault for helping them love the sport. But it wasn't me getting on the tour. It's just a different coaching world. And even Bobby's situation is the same thing. And so you're talking to us today because you've got a connection with Nick. You said you've worked with him specifically, and you've got some content on what is called coachlife.com. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, really excited about this website. I think it's really unique because it's bringing together 20 coaches from around the world and 20 really successful coaches who have produced players that have gone on to be, top 20 Grand Slam champion players. So some of the coaches are American coaches, Sly Black, who coached Coco Gauff and Sloane Stephens through their junior years, Michael Joyce, who worked with Sharapova, of course, on tour, but also Pegula for several years, Guy Fritz, who obviously developed Taylor all through his juniors, Diego Mayano, who worked for the USTA for many years, Coach Tommy Paul, Rilo Pelka, Francis Tiafo. We've also got Schwantek's coach, spent 6 years with her through her teenage years, was incredibly successful. Another coach from Australia, Gary Stickler, who coached Pat Rafter, Jason Kubler, John Millman, really successful, experienced, highly respected coach in Australia. So what it is over 600 videos on this website. It's basically these 20 coaches giving all the information they have, what strategies, drills, techniques they use to develop skills and develop game style, technique, footwork, mental strategies, etc., etc. So, as you know, junior coaching is different to tour coaching. I mean, we are developing the basics and the fundamentals. I'm taking kids on who are 11 years old and going, this is how you hit a kick serve, and they have no idea how to hit a kick serve. So how to hit a volley or a forehand or whatever, trying to take them from, junior players into elite, some of the world's best junior players. So it's really developing those fundamental skills. I think there's something that for everyone out there, recreational players, parents, coaches, I talk a lot about what parents can do to help their kids develop. So I think there's something for everyone on there. Really excited about the website. I think it's going to be really popular. No one's really ever done it before. It's a huge effort to travel around the world and get all these coaches and film them all and get their information. So yeah, for the cost of a couple of private lessons, like I said, there's over 500 videos on there. So a huge amount of information for any aspiring tennis player.
Okay, so before I ask you to give away all the stuff for free here, which give us all the tips and everything. I'm curious. So as a coach of a guy like Kyrgios and maybe in that same generation that those Australian players, we knew a few. Bobby and I follow the tour. We've got some friends that came off the tour that we all know. And for some reason, there was always the Aussie that could volley. And you talk about Pat Rafter. That was always my guy in the 90s because I had an initial experience with Andre Agassi, and I didn't like him at the time. I was mad at him. So I was always cheering for Rafter against Agassi as the American kid, and that was always weird. But there was always that kick serve. There was always that volley. Even the Aussies we know here, Bobby, we talk about the guys that are coaches even now, that just seem to have volleys. What is it about even a guy like Nick that you look at him and he just doesn't even seem to try at times, but he can just hit a ball from anywhere to anywhere. Is that Aussie blood? Is you just born like that, or is that just magic coaching, or is it a combination?
Yeah, I think it's coaching. It's really
Of
interesting.
course you do. You're the coach.
That's right. It's interesting looking around different nations, and different nations do things differently and better. But yeah, I think it's been passed down through the generations, to be honest. I mean, the 60s era where we had so many great players and so much tennis was played on grass. We had so many grass courts in Australia, and you have to volley on grass, on real grass. You have to come in. You can't volley. Well, certainly, maybe you get away with a little bit more now, but back then you had to be able to volley. And the coaches from that era, I suppose, we had some great coaches like Harry Hopman, Ray Ruffles, Bob Carmichael. These guys are all older now, but I really think they passed that down to the generation of coaches my era. I think it's just continued on. It's something you got to work on. Surfaces help a little bit. We do still play some junior tennis here on natural grass. We've made a point of keep doing that. Aussies have always done all right at Wimbledon, but I think it's a combination of coaching and the surfaces we play on, and just making an effort to really teach your players how to volley. I think you spend so much time on serve, forehand, backhand movement. I know a lot of matches in tennis are played like that, but also, look at the trends of the game. Guys are coming to the net a lot throughout a match. So if you can volley, I think it's really important. And yeah, I do. I think it comes down to coaching and dedicating the time to really get out there and work on volleys. And sometimes it's going to be harder to work on volleys with junior players because they're not very good at it, and it's difficult to set up fun drills, etc. But you got to find a way, I think, to do it.
Yeah, we agree. Bobby, excuse me, Bobby, I saw a meme the other day of, where they put the picture of the thing and they say, oh, here's me working on my serve, 10%, working on my forehand, 90%, and working on my back. And then it was volleys. It was like, volleys? What are volleys? Like, do you agree we probably, as Americans, big serve, big forehand, probably don't put enough time into our volleys?
Who are you talking to, Shaun?
I'm talking to you, Bobby, because we're the Americans. I'm curious because they're so, I don't know what it is. Like you said, it's the coaching in Australia is different here. And so they end up with a Nick Kyrgios type, and we end up with the same query. Is that an unfair comparison?
Oh, I think you're spot on. I mean, we're known for, I'll go a little higher than 10%. Obviously, because I was a big Sampras fan, and I always felt like he didn't get enough credit because the great shot was the serve, and people like, well, he's got a great serve. Well, yeah, but he worked at it. I mean, that, like you said, technically, as far as if you're going to teach a serve and the athleticism combined, probably prior to Nick, the most athletic guy that played on tour in I would say my lifetime, just if up until the last round of guys, the Federer, Nadal, I think, and Novak. I think you could see them all in different places. But before that, Sampras was always the guy to me that stuck out that you could see in a different arena if he had gone a different way. So I'm a big believer in the American. We spend a little, and Nick, I think that's again coaching, because that was Nick. Nick was big forehand. He believed you need to have two shots, and he wouldn't even teach a return of serve right away because He wanted you to get your forehand down first, and then as the game exploded and the speed got bigger, that he would start to change his philosophy a little bit, where you're going to have to adapt. But yeah, I don't think that's an unfair statement. That's what the majority of the time. And then when you have success and you try to introduce a continental grip after the fact, where you're going to have some failure, that's a tough thing too. Now I'm going to go backwards. Yeah, you're going to go backwards a while.
Yeah, exactly. So Todd, talk to us about that Nick Kyrgios coaching experience, because that's, I would guess, what a lot of people would be interested in. You look at a guy like Demonar, and he's the guy that's just, he's going to make a lot of balls, and every coach can go, okay, yeah, that's exactly how you'd want a guy to structure a game around the court. But Nick came up, I hear rumor he wasn't the fittest kid when he started, and how did that develop? Can you catch us up on all that? Because that's got to be an interesting story.
Yeah, really interesting story. You know, Nick at 10, when I started with him, quite unathletic. He had some characteristics of athleticism, great hand-eye coordination, great ball striker, but very slow around the court. And so kind of had to develop his game style around that a little bit, around his personality, but also around his athleticism. I mean, his defense was almost non-existent, right? So he really had to play a super aggressive game. We really tried to make the court smaller, stay up on the baseline. You know, talk about serve and forehand, but that was my philosophy as well. You need to have a great serve and a great forehand. And we really worked hard on that, and really hard on trying to dictate the point at all costs for him. It's really interesting, because had I got a player who's quicker, then I probably wouldn't have developed that way. He may not have been as good. So it's interesting that Nick couldn't really move much. Therefore, he was a hell of a competitor, and he wanted to win. So, you know, he really tried to find a way. How could he win with the athleticism and the attributes that he had? So playing really aggressive, getting that first strike in, serving big, taking the ball early. That was the way that we developed, and that's the way it kind of evolved. You know, when he got older, 17, 18, that's when he really started to develop his athleticism and his movement, got in the gym more, and got a full-time physical trainer, and really put a huge amount of effort into his diet, etc. in that period, which was really huge for him. But certainly in juniors, really interesting that as a coach, you really got to look at the two things you look at are the personality of the kid you're coaching and their physical attributes, and you try to build a game style around that. And, you know, Nick always really wanted to play really aggressively. It's something he's taken through pro tennis. Whenever he gets an opportunity in a match, a break point or a big point, he's always like, I want to take control of the point. You rarely see Nick go defensive or not take an opportunity. He'll always go for that big shot, the drop shot, the big winner, the big serve, the big second serve, the serve volley. He'll always try to take the calculated risk and be the one who controls the point in those big moments. It's a message that my coach has told me, and I always push to him, but something naturally that he always wanted to do, fit around his personality, his game style, etc. So, you know, it's really interesting that that's the kind of way it evolved. And yeah, you got to coach the individual as a coach. You can't coach everyone the same, and had to work hard with Nick with his personality.
I'm sure, and this makes me think of a James Blake tip. I don't know why it was him specifically that came to mind, but his tip was for coaches, and he said, you've got to coach to the player. You can't just say, well, I'm a coach and this is the way I do it. You've got to find what that player is capable of and speak to them where they are and work with what they are, rather than taking somebody and try to jam them into some coaching mold, because that's all you do. And I think that speaks to the coaching ability of somebody like you that says, okay, you saw what was there. And like, I don't know, like a sculptor is a coach, a sculptor, say that there's this brilliance underneath here. That, did you see it at 10, or was it just the kind of thing that he was one of the 10-year-olds that stuck it out and became good?
Yeah, like it's hard at 10. I had a bunch of about 7 players, and I really wasn't sure who was going to make it out of that 10. You have no idea. You are like a sculptor, or like you're building a house. You've got a long period of time, and you're really trying to plan it out well, and look at that individual player and think, how is that player going to play in several years' time, and what are their strengths and their attributes, and how do you build that? Nick, really was such a great competitor from a young age. And, I remember when I first started coaching, I was looking for the athlete, and it was all about identifying the athlete, who's the greatest athlete. And he kind of changed my perception on that. And now I'm really looking for the competitor. I do feel it's the most important aspect of tennis, and it determines how far you're going to go. The scoring system in tennis is tough, because every match you play is critical points. If you can't compose yourself, if you can't believe in yourself and execute your shots under pressure at any level and really step up and play well when it matters in tennis, you're not going anywhere. And it doesn't matter how good an athlete you are. So it's such a big part of the game. And he had that just that raw competitiveness where he's just so desperate to win every match he played, and just the ability to find a way. I didn't teach him that, but that's what I'm looking for in a player, because I feel like I can teach most other things: technique, movement, footwork, tactics, game style. It's very, very difficult to teach those mental skills. I mean, you can try. I've tried a lot, but you have to have a born competitor, someone really wants to compete.
So Bobby's going to jump in, I know, because I can see his brain running, because he and I talk a lot. There are two things you can't teach, which is genetics and that competitive nature. So Bobby, I know you're going to want to say, hey, Todd, give me everything you got on finding that kid, because Bobby's got the same issues. Okay, if the genetics either are or aren't there, how do you find that kid that just hates to lose, right, Bobby?
Well, and I to the contrary, I'm laughing. I'm like, well, I really have nothing to say, because Todd pretty much said everything that I believe.
Yep.
Like I said, it gets to, unfortunately, and you hate to. I'm working with a good kid, a kid very disciplined, Lil Davis, who is very disciplined, got the maturity at a very young age. As you said, he's probably going to be 5'3", and he's a nice kid. Now he does like to show off a little bit, which is good. He plays to the crowd. So it might be, it's a different way to get there. But, just from what Todd said, I would have bet Nick was the superstar athlete from day one who evolved into, the pain points. But yeah, I completely agree. And this is what Bollettieri always said. And I always tell the Richard Williams story about Serena when, they did the 60 Minutes and Venus was coming up and starting to have some success. And Richard just laughed and said, yeah, but wait till you see the younger one. She's just as good. Venus is nice. Serena's as mean as a snake. She doesn't like to lose. And, there's some, and Nadal, frankly, one of the greatest competitors that I've ever seen. And I don't even point to the Wimbledon he won, the classic Wimbledon that we talked about. I've looked at the year before when Federer was serving for the match at 5-2. And I swore at that point, if Nadal would have broke him, he was winning that match, because he just wouldn't accept losing. So it's good to hear that, it's sad to say, because it is tough, nurture versus nature. What do you do when you're dealing with that? Or I guess, Todd, what do we do? How do we cultivate it when we see it and keep the person sane? But you gotta keep feeding the meat to the lion. We want an alpha.
Yeah, that's right. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I suppose it's when I see that raw competitiveness, it's about trying to direct it, and I suppose contain it a little bit. In Nick's case, I had to contain it a little bit and just try to direct him in the right direction from competitive point of view, because sometimes he went over the top, and those highly competitive kids can really get so emotional. So I suppose it's about trying to help him understand about where that line is, and how does he control his emotions to a certain point without losing his raw competitiveness. You don't want to make him, a guy like Nick, he's always competed on that red line a little bit, right on the edge of that red line. Whereas, a guy like Federer or Sampras, they appear to be so calm and cool, and that's how they compete their best. But Nick always needs to be that little bit pumped up, a little bit fired up, and he's always walking that edge a little bit. And that's where he had to be, I suppose, to play his best tennis. That's where he has to be. But I suppose it was, as a coach, is really trying to just make him understand that, and just rein it in a little bit, and just keep him just understanding that he needs to stay calm a little bit on court and compose himself, but without losing that real fire. And like you said with Serena, you see that with her as well. that fire and that passion, and you don't want to lose that. That's what I want, and that's what I'm really trying to identify in kids, is that competitiveness and that fire and that motivation, that passion for the sport and passion to win. That's what you want. They can take you a long way, a really long way in tennis. I think can take you all the way.
I completely agree. That let me ask. I'm guessing here, pretty high IQ intellectually, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. Incredibly high IQ for tennis tactically. Incredible tennis tactic. I'll tell you a little story. When he was about 14, he was going to play a player in the final of a nationals in Australia. This kid had a real bad backhand. And I said to him, okay, how do you, rather than me telling the kids everything, I really like to ask them, how tactically are you going to beat this kid? He said, okay, Todd, the first court, I'm going to serve him wide a lot. I'm going to open up, expose that backhand, first shot into his backhand, get him really defending out of that corner. You know, when in the rally, I'm going to really stop him running around his backhand, dominating his forehand. So I'm going to take my backhand down the line early in the rally, get him out in that corner so I can open up his backhand. On the second court, I'm going to hit kick serves to his backhand to expose that weakness. So, and I just sat there and went, wow, like that. Yeah, you got it, mate. That's what I was going to say. You got it. Like, so such a great tactical IQ from a very young age. So it's really interesting and still does. He says he doesn't need a coach, and sometimes I disagree. Some coaching would help, but tactically he is very, very switched on. And maybe something that people don't see, but behind the scenes, he's watching tennis and he is, analyzing players. And you can ask him how to beat Federer and Djokovic, Nadal, and he will reel it off to you straight away. He knows exactly what their strengths and weaknesses are and how he might be able to expose that. So very high IQ from a tennis point of view, from a very young age, which is really interesting.
Well, but I think that leads to the volatility. I always laugh because obviously McEnroe, off the charts, very intelligent. Chrissy Everett was the opposite, and she would, ultimately come out and say, "Well, I wasn't real smart. I did it this, a certain way a lot of times." But and I think that plays to the volatility. And I look at, and I'd be curious your thought on this. I used to be a big proponent of kids getting exposure to a lot of sports. This way they learn the competitiveness. To me, my philosophy there is changing a little bit just because of the level that we're seeing professionally, even in D1 tennis. If you're going to get to those levels, you got to be pretty set structurally at a pretty young age. And then hopefully a coach can, nurture and develop tactics. And then, as we all said, the wild card genetic kicks in our favor. But, that's the hard part. I look at, and I use myself, and not that I was, going to go to either that spot, either level. I played baseball from the time I could walk. And I was an undersized pitcher, but as a pitcher, I was volatile. Tennis, I kind of loved the game. My coaches would look at me and say, God, if his tennis game ever develops to his athleticism, we got something. But that wasn't what I enjoyed about tennis. I'm 58, I'm still playing because I love to hit that silly ball. Where baseball, if you crowded the plate, I didn't care how big you are, I was going to stick it in your ear. And, and when I see that now with these kids, I'm like, do we need to get them at 9 and 10 years old, get them through the 13s and 14s where they're ready at 15, 16 to take that next step?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that about other sports because, as you know, Nick played basketball, you might know, but he played basketball from the day he started playing tennis as well. He played basketball all the way through to about age 15. So really interesting because, I'm someone who encourages kids to play other sports, but as we know, it's difficult to find the time to get the volume of tennis that you need and also play another sport. But I'm probably one on the side of where I'm not an extreme volume coach. I kind of, a kid age about 13, I think about 12 to 13 hours of tennis on court a week is enough. Then you might be able to fit in, then you got time to fit in another sport. But I played heaps of sports as a kid, and I really think it's critical, not critical. I know it's not critical, but I really think it's important to play another sport. Nick developed so much from basketball, his hand-eye coordination, such a big thing in tennis. He developed that in basketball as well as tennis. Footwork, perception, but also just for your mental well-being, playing another sport, playing a team sport is great, I think, and having an interest outside of tennis, not just hitting, like you say, not just hitting balls every single day, tennis balls. So really interesting that that you like kids playing other sports. I certainly do as well, as long as you can find the time. And he only played, I think you can, he did one training session basketball once a week, then played one game on a Sunday. So it's not a huge commitment. He could still easily get his 14, 15 hours of tennis in a week. But yeah, that was really important for him, I think, to play that basketball. And he still loves basketball, and he might have been a good basketball player. I don't know. He's certainly pretty good, but yeah, I'm glad he picked tennis. But yeah, it's interesting that, I guess, I don't know. I don't think we see interesting what you see, but I think kids maybe play a bit too much tennis sometimes. I don't know. Interesting what your take on that is, the volume of how much tennis. You're right. You do need to be good at a young age in tennis. We know that.
Well, I think you nailed it. I think the stroke discipline is the on-court stuff. What I see, and go back to the American player where they don't have this, is the footwork. Everybody asks me, my coach was all about looking cool. And I love, thankfully for me, it wasn't a choice. I'm 5'9". I love basketball. If that was, if there was a sport, if you asked me what would I want to do, that's it. I love basketball, but I was 5'9", so there was a reality thing. And I was 5'9" later in life. I was the short, I was always the kid who sat on the floor. So I was always small. But, people ask me, where'd you get your footwork? I'm like, I played a little defensive back in football, and I played basketball, and I was a shortstop. That's where I got, when we do the drills and we do cones and we do ladders, I don't know how to do that, because that's not how I did it. I did it, when I do footwork drills, I'm like, well, let's do some pass patterns, do a down and out, because that's how I learned it, So I do think, absolutely, I wish the kids, and obviously with the Europeans, with soccer, that they get it there. I don't think, and I think that's where the American kids fail, and I think it, like you said, leads to critical point errors because they have the shots, they don't set up properly, and they miss. When and you don't get a lot of chances in tennis to miss. When you have the opportunity, you have to capitalize. So yeah, I think that's the hard part. How do we get them, as you said, 1 or 2 days a week? These academies, the voluntary academies, why aren't they playing basketball 1 day a week? We're going to go play that, and because you need it. And there's always ladders. You don't look down at a floor and look at a ladder and say, "Oh, now I know my next step." It's natural. You got to do it. And yes, I do think there's a lacking here in America when it comes to footwork, and I do attribute it to the lack of the second sport.
Yep, totally agree.
When we look at a guy like Sinner, like Yannick Sinner, who national champion skier or something. So we look at the multiple sport athletes, and I think back, Bobby, here in the Atlanta area, I think of a Jeff Francoeur, who was in high school about the same time that I was, and he was a guy, Todd, that was just, if everybody was playing baseball and everybody had their high school 400, 500 average, he had like a 900 average. I mean, he was just the guy that was just that much better than everybody else. And every once in a while, you have that guy. And even in tennis, you end up with that same thing. We had the kid, we were losing to the 10-year-old when we were 15 because he was going to be that guy. But it was also a reminder that we weren't going to be that guy because we're losing. Or if there's the young Nick Kyrgios coming up or the young Alex de Minaur, the kids that really just figure it out early. Sometimes they dive into tennis and they need that release of a basketball or a baseball for Bobby, really the thing he actually loved, more so in that way. But I think that also prevents burnout, Todd. Is that not something you see there absolutely as well?
Yeah, it's something we see a huge amount of. Often it's parent driven, to be honest. I think tennis, we are the leader for psychotic parents in any sport. I think we're the winners, aren't we? I don't know.
No, you don't have ice hockey there, do you?
No, I haven't seen ice hockey, but yeah, I think sometimes parent driven, they think that you got to do more and more and more and more hours on court, hit more balls, but so often it's not the case. You need to go and play some other sports and have fun and play a team sport. I think, it's something in Australia that I continue to push and try to. It's hard with parents because they think, I'm missing a session and that Wednesday afternoon I should be hitting another 1,000 tennis balls. But actually know, if you're doing 12, 13 hours on court as a 12-year-old, if you're not good enough and you can't make it doing that, you probably ain't going to make it. So I really think that it's critical playing those other sports, and something in Australia we're grappling with, same as America, I'm sure. I like Europe that play soccer, like you say, so good for their footwork and their other athletics, their all-round athleticism. So yeah, something anyone listening, parents listening to this podcast, yeah, if you can, get your kids into multiple sports if you can.
Yeah.
Really important.
If you're that one sport thing, because Bobby and I also know here, we also end up with the other side where the kids don't have enough time for anything else because they're doing 7 different things 7 days a week, and they can't actually focus on one thing, but probably a different problem in that case.
Well, but I think that speaks to, again, if you're going to make this commitment, and and Scott Corder, his daughter played Division I tennis, was a satellite player, had a little success, and his role, was always, I want to do as much as for her to succeed. I don't want to sit there and dangle a carrot and then say, okay, but you have to do this. If that's what you're going to do, that give the child every available option that you can afford to do it. But you brought up an interesting point, Shaun, and I'd love to get Todd's opinion on this, because you mentioned Jeff Francoeur, and I don't know, Todd, Jeff Francoeur was a professional baseball player and a superstar athlete, played. He could have went to Clemson, which is a great American football school to play football. But as Norman Nobody, when I saw Jeff Francoeur hit, I said, wow, he's got a big problem. And, he came on at, young, took the world by storm, and he was out almost as equally fast because they identified the weakness and played to it. I look at Robbie Ginepri. I remember seeing Robbie Ginepri, the tennis player, as a 15-year-old running around hitting round strokes saying, oh my God, who is this? And then I saw him serve and I said, oh. Now, as the coach, how do you, and using Pete Sampras, this story of infamous Sampras, that, his goal was to win Wimbledon, and his coach had said, well, there had never been a two-hander, serve and volleyer, who won Wimbledon. We have to make your backhand one hand. And he did it, and he went from, number 1 in California in the 14s all the way down to number 3 or 4. In Atlanta, the coach would have been fired. As a coach, how do you sit there and say, we got a lot of great things, but there is something that's exploitable. We need to take a step back. And here, because the competitiveness of, there's only so many Robbie Ginepris. There's only so many. You see that kid and you see a meal ticket and you see a journey. Where's the responsibility of the coach to sit there and say, yeah, but we're limited by what we see right now.
Yeah, really good point. And I really think that's a critical thing about coaching. It's a bit of art of coaching, isn't it? You have to be, I suppose, confident enough as a coach to really, when you've got a really top junior, to say, hold on a second, it's easy to not rock the boat, I suppose, as a coach and just do nothing. The kid's going along great and they're winning titles, etc. And we're not going to keep developing. But I suppose as a coach, you've got to force yourself and be confident and strong enough to keep identifying those weaknesses and keep developing that game. And it's a critical, as a junior coach, I think I'm trying to do 2 things. One is trying to develop their game for the long term for pro tennis, and you're trying to get results along the way as well. And I think that's the balance as a junior coach, and the art of being a really, really good high performance junior coach is you're trying to do both. You want to get results and you want to develop for the long term, and you've got to keep focusing on both things. If you focus on one thing too much, all about results, then you're probably not going to get the development. But if it's all about development, you go, oh, I don't care about results. Well, then your player may well fall too far behind the pack and might be too hard to catch up later on. So trying to find that balance the whole time as a junior coach, and being strong enough and confident enough to go, that forehand isn't going to hold up in 5 years. We need to make that change now and iron out that swing and get the better grip now. So in the long term, that's the end game, right? Convincing the parents and the athlete, the end game is pro tennis. And that's where we want to go. And you don't want to have a great junior career and then have, like you said, not a very good pro career. So yeah, it's a really good point. And I think the best coaches can do that around the world. I think the best junior coaches, and that's why we've got some great coaches on Coach Life, the ones who've had real success where their players have really gone on to be great players. And they're the coaches we want to hear from. And how did they do that? How did they balance that result and development aspect and continue to get their player to improve each and every year?
Yeah, it's good. I appreciate that. Sorry, Bobby, you got one more? Because I was going to say, I don't know if we get to talk to all the coaches at Coach Life, but when we got Todd, we definitely got to hit him with King of Tennis. So,
well, I'm going to let him go, but I mean, because I'm a big Nick fan, and again, contrary to his personality or what is perceived as his personality, he's remarkably efficient on the court. I mean, he's one of the guys I turn to with my kids and say, look at his setup on his backhand, especially. There's not a lot of extra motion going on. You know, just the brief conversation we had with the founder of Coach Life, talking about the Speed Tech, you know, what they did with her forehand and how they pinned. All right, you know, that's a little extreme. I like it to be a little looser, but you know, these are the things. If you look at that level too, they're usually very, 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 very good at the basics. And you know, and Nick is that guy. And it's almost a curse when you look at and say athleticism. This, well, why? Well, he's beyond the top 1%. I mean, how many billions of people are in this world? You know, there's only so many more notches you can climb. I don't know where you go. And when you're at that level, there's 5 or 6 other guys, and especially in his era, it was dominated by 3 people. You know, how many people didn't win Grand Slams because of that 3-headed monster called Novak, Roger, and Rafa? Yeah. That's tough to sit there and say I wasn't a success. I wasn't a success because I couldn't beat these 3. I'll take it.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm all right with that decision. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the cool things about talking about a guy like Nick is that we get to talk more importantly to a guy like Todd. And that's why I appreciate the time, Todd, because anybody could look at that and say, oh my gosh, well, clearly that was genetics, or clearly that was coaching, or whatever it is, that they look at it and they can't see the decades almost of work from how we started at 7. Who knows when he hit his first tennis ball? Was that probably that young, or maybe a little earlier for him?
Yeah, probably 6 or 7. That would have been about right. Yeah.
6 or 7 is the usual time when that happens. And you give them a few years and they get into it, and all of a sudden you see the kid. Makes me think of a guy on my college tennis team that he was the kid. He was overweight, but man, if you gave him a ball in the strike zone, you lost the point. The point was over, and it didn't matter what was going on. He was going to figure out how to efficiently win the point. To Bobby's point, which is, and you just got to work with what you have, and at some point you just end up unbelievably good at it. And if you're lucky enough to have a guy like Todd in your life that can help you get there, I'd say Nick's going to be thankful to you, right?
Yeah, well, that's right. I always say, like, I didn't teach Nick all these. No coach can claim they taught all these amazing things. I didn't teach Nick all these amazing things. But I think I always say to coaches, if you had a player like Nick Kyrgios walk through your door, do you have the environment and the knowledge to develop that talent? And I suppose that's kind of my message to other coaches. Like, when talent walks through your door, are you set up to be able to teach the fundamentals and the basics and all the things that a player needs to have? And so if you combine that incredible talent with those fundamentals and that hard work and the years of hard work, well, then you might have something really special. So, you know, what's the secret to developing players? I think the secret is having good coaching knowledge, continue to educate yourself, having a great environment, then hoping someone like Nick walks through your door and you get lucky, like you say. He's a once in a generation player.
Yeah.
So I was just lucky that he came along when I was in the right place at the right time, and hopefully I helped him learn all those fundamentals of the sport.
And there you go, coaches. There's your advice. It's be ready, right? It's Bobby? It's it's not luck. It's the intersection of
opportunity and preparation.
Thank you. Opportunity and preparation. There it is. I like it. Well, Todd, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I do want to ask you our King of Tennis question. And we ask this of everybody we talk to, and we are always curious, if you were put in charge of tennis, if you were king of tennis, whether it's professional tennis, junior, social, anywhere in the world, Australia, doesn't matter, anywhere for any amount of time. If you were king of tennis, is there anything you would do or change?
I love this question, and there sure is. And I'm gonna go the professional tennis
Okay.
route here. The first thing I would do is combine the ATP and WTA tours. I really believe we should have one tour. I believe every tournament you go to is better with a men's and women's event, better for the media, better for the spectators, better for the TV ratings, better for the sport, the prize money, the profit of the tournament, etc. I really think the Grand Slams are doing it so well. You leave the Grand Slams with the ITF, but the ATP Tour and WTA combines. The other thing I hate in tennis is a ranking system. I'd really like to change and make it like golf, where the top 100 players have their card for the year, January to November. You play the full season. If you finish top 80 in the world, you retain your card. If you're outside of that and you're in the bottom 20, you're relegated to the Challenger Tour, and you have to have a year on the Challenger Tour, and you got to get back in. That would be what I would want to do. I really think you could still have 2 tournaments on a week. You could still have a men's and women's event in Stuttgart and one in Istanbul, for example. So you could still, outside of the Master Series, you could still have 2 or 3 events on at the same time. But I think men's and women's every week together would be amazing. Also think a card would be amazing. And, end of season, end of November, start of November, end of the tennis season. Give the players a rest, give the fans a rest, 7-8 weeks. And we start again and we go January to November. So that's my call. Whether you could bring the WTA and ATP to the details would be tricky.
That's
So I
always
really
the
think we're
pushback
better
that we
together.
do. We push back and we say, all right, Todd, now you're in charge. I'm going to have you call the ATP. Now you got to make it happen, right? That's the hard part.
You look at Madrid, I think every tournament, sometimes the men's tournament is a fizzer and the women step up. Sometimes the other way around. You got both tournaments there. You got the best players in both men's and women's. There's always great matches. Madrid, all the men fell out, but Swiatek and Zabalenka, unbelievable final. The woman held the tournament up there. At the Aussie Open this year, it was the men who held the tournament up. But there's so many fans who want to see both when they go to a tournament. So I really like to see an expansion of that, and every single tournament, men's and women's, the best players in the world at the same venue.
Yeah, a lot of people would agree with you. And Bobby and I have heard a theme recently, which is about creating a season, which is about having a downtime for these players, give them a chance to rest. I say rest, relax, and come back fresh, but that probably just means they're going to be out there busting their ass, getting ready for the next season. But at least maybe not on, working hard 7 matches over a week and a half or 2 weeks. But Todd, I appreciate your time. This has been amazing. Like I said ahead of time, it's just really cool. We can talk to you in Australia live and see each other and look each other in the eye. And I love the technology. I love the fact that we can just do this and have a conversation. I appreciate you making time, and we will put all the Coach Life links in the show notes, and we'll promote all that, and we'll get your name and everything put down in there. I think we've got a referral fee or a referral link that lets you know who clicks on what. And if our listeners want to go out and grab a membership to coachlife.com, it is pretty cool. There's some good content there. Guys like Todd, but maybe not exactly like Todd, but guys with some similar stories, because not everybody has that Nick Kyrgios story for sure.
Well, but I think there's no coincidence that Coach Life pointed us toward Todd first. And we appreciate that, Todd, because, well, you hit all my buttons. I don't know. I could go longer.
All the right answers. Exactly. I appreciate it.
That's great.
Todd,
thanks so much for having me. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Real pleasure to be on your show, and really love talking tennis.